So when did Spike approach you about BlacKkKlansman?
Oh, I forget the actual day, but he got in touch with me, and I had sort of heard that something might be happening, and we sort of got together, the location manager and I, and we decided that we would try and do it in New York. And so Spike called. He said, "I got this project. Where should we do this?" I said, "We got to do it in New York."
To dub for 1970s Colorado
For 1970s
Springs.
Colorado Springs. So I called Tim, the location manager, immediately afterwards. I'm like, "Tim, how are we going to do this?" So we figured it out. We made a scouting trip out to Colorado Springs to figure out what the vibe was and what it needed to be. And then we started scouting small towns in upstate New York to try and find something that approximated 1970s, 1972 Colorado Springs. And we wound up, we looked at 8 different towns, and then we landed on a small town called Ossining.
What was it about Ossining?
Ossining had the right vintage of buildings, sort of a vaguely western town look to it. Had a little bit of elevation change, which is not necessarily perfect for Colorado Springs, but worked okay. And then when it's on the Hudson, so when you look across the river, there's a really nice, clean matte line there also, where we could add Pikes Peak later on. So that was valuable. And you don't see very much of the downtown, but the other nice thing about the town was the houses were all sort of built in the 40s, 50s, 60s. So a lot of those locations were of the right vintage also, what we needed. Yeah.
What kind of research did you do into 1972?
Oh man, we looked at everything, and there's a lot of things that there were a lot of social justice organizations that were starting then, like the Black Panthers and lots of other ones that were all called out in the movie. So we had to look at all of those protest movements, and then the more unpleasant things, the lynchings that had been happening since for way too long, for forever. That was a big part of it as well, and so there's a lot of things that we saw in our research that we'd like to unsee, but that's what you do. You dive into a period, dive into what really happens, and then you have to work with it. You have to deal with it. There were some days when I'd give an assignment to the PAs, and they'd be looking at stuff, and they'd come to me and they'd be like, "We need a break." Mm-hmm. And I would say, "Okay, take a minute, go walk around for a while and think about something else, because there's some bad things to look at when you're talking about the alt-right and that history."
Mm-hmm. How much was on location, and how many sets and stages did you build?
Our main build was the police precinct, which filled up a very large stage, and that was 27 pages, I think, of the script. So it was a big important thing that we needed to do. And finding a police precinct in New York is very difficult, because there are a lot of procedural shows in New York. So all the precincts and anything that resembles a precinct is usually in use. And this was a little more specific, so it was better to build that and give us some place to go in the case of weather and stuff too. So we built that from scratch. And then David Duke's office was also sitting on stage. So if you walked out of the back of the intelligence bullpen, you'd be standing in David Duke's office, which is a nice little irony. And then beyond that was the big final long hallway for the final shot of the film, which is very important to it's in a very Spike Lee shot. So we built a 60-foot long piece of hallway that he could truck down. And, that was important.
I like the layout of everyone's desks in the precinct, because there's, like, when Ron makes the phone call to the KKK, I think it's also like the way of a shot, because everyone else's desk is like their backs or sides are to him.
Yeah.
And then when he starts talking, they all turn around, which is just a great reaction shot. So how did you go about doing that layout?
That was one of those eureka moments that I had when I was laying out. I'll often lay out the furniture first and the walls around it. And in this case, I had sort of been doing the two in tandem, and I had one corner of the office had solid walls, and I knew I didn't want to stick his desk there because we'd be at his desk a lot and we'd sort of be stuck looking into a wall. So I put it in the other corner, thinking that would be nicer because it's glass and you could see through it and get some nice depth and people walking by and all that stuff. But then I had that moment when I was playing with the ground plan and I turned his desk the other way, and I realized, oh, this is interesting. Now, I gave him a smaller desk also. His desk is smaller than everyone else's. He's ostracized, he's in the corner, and everyone else in the room has their back to him, further ostracizing him. It's one of many tools that we have, our special secret superpowers to make the audience think things and feel different ways by how we organize a room or decorate things, and it's it's fun to use those tools to push the feeling. But after all that, I have no idea what's going to happen with the shot. I just lay it out as a concept. I didn't tell Spike, oh, his back is to everyone else's. That we never had that conversation. But it organically happened where he laid out that great shot where, he's on the phone to the KKK and everyone does that slow burn, turn around. It's a great shot, but it wasn't necessarily planned. It's just one of those great things that happens in the course of designing something.
I really like Ron's apartment and just his look in general because it's a lot of vibrant colors, very hip style. And did you work closely with the costume designer to match his apartment with the colors of his clothing?
Yeah, Marcy and I talked a lot, and I would always sort of check in with her about choices that I was making to make sure that things weren't clashing and that people weren't going to get lost against the backgrounds of the places, the environments that they were in, and she would check in with me about making sure that things were going to work well. So, yeah, we had a lot of discussion to make sure that it was all copacetic, all working.
Was Felix's house on location or just exterior?
All of Felix's was on location, and there are two really nice things that we were able to do. That house was owned by an African-American family. Ironic. And we shot the initiation for the KKK and the banquet in a church, a predominantly black church in Brooklyn. So that was great, and I like this.
Well, Felix's house, I like the way, I think is also the way of a shot with your special tricks and stuff, but
special secret superpowers.
Yeah, that you can't reveal tonight. But it just felt very cramped and enclosed, with just the style too. And obviously in the basement there are low ceilings, but it also gave you a sense of it's like the KKK plotting nefarious schemes in the basement. And did you do that to symbolize their closed-mindedness, their ignorance, and just the way you design the space there?
Not so much that, but I did want the basement to feel like a hub of the dissemination of the ideas that they're talking about upstairs in the living room. So there was a mimeograph machine in there, there was a telephone in there, and the idea is that if it was modern day, there would be a whole bank of servers down there where they're storing all of their evils. But in this case, that's it literally is where they're mailing things out to everyone and trying to get the word out. So yeah, we approached that space as a very specific thing. Yeah.
Was it difficult to find all those things to decorate the set, like the mimeograph or?
Yeah, I mean the 70s are particularly difficult because most of the stuff that was made then is crap. It was fairly disposable. It wasn't all very well built, and not like the antiques of the 19th century. So, and it wasn't highly valued. So a lot of it is tossed, and so it's hard to find good pieces that make sense and still work, and finding a mimeograph machine that is the right vintage and the right microfiche machine. Like, all those things have to be perfect. So yeah, the 70s are a little trickier than I think it looks at first blush.
Was there anything you wanted that you couldn't find?
No, my team found it all.
They're that good.
They're that good.
Well, in the initiation scene, I love the shot of Ron like spying from that attic area. Was that part of the church or another space?
No, we built that into that space. We scouted a lot of different places, trying to find something that matched the geography that was written, and it was not to be had. So we found as big a space as we could to build into, and then we made that storage room in the space so that it would get the right shot and the right perspective for him spying on them. So it worked out really well. It was in the basement of this church.
So what are you working on next?
I cannot say.
Why not?
'Cause I'm not sure.